Welcome to what promises to be another remarkable evening at the City Opera House. This evening, we welcome Bryan Gruley back to the NWS stage as a special guest host for a conversation with Michael Connelly. Gruley is the critically acclaimed author of the Starvation Lake trilogy, which takes place in northern Michigan, and the first book in that series won an Edgar Award for the best first novel by the Mystery Writers of America. His books have won multiple awards, and the series has been optioned for a movie by writer-director John Gray. Reviewers have actually compared Gruley to the likes of Dennis Lehane. Bryan is a reporter at large for Bloomberg News, and prior to that, he spent almost 16 years with the Wall Street Journal, where in 2002 he shared a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the September 11th terrorist attacks. He currently lives in Illinois, but he grew up in Michigan and has a thing for hockey and the Red Wings, and as I discovered a little bit earlier, he does a pretty mean Ernie Harwell impression. And in fact, he still plays hockey on a regular basis. Michael Connelly is an international best-selling author and the creator of modern fiction's most enigmatic detective, the jazz-loving, tattooed Harry Bosch. Michael has also enjoyed major success with the non-series novels like The Lincoln Lawyer, which was adapted into a hit film starring Matthew McConaughey in 2011. Connelly launched the Harry Bosch series in 1992 with The Black Echo, which also won the Edgar Award for the best first novel by the Mystery Writers of America. And it gained national attention in 1994 when President Clinton was photographed holding a copy of the third Bosch novel, The Concrete Blonde. Subsequent novels in the series have consistently landed... You guys are... Okay, on to the next thing. Subsequent novels in the series have consistently landed on the New York Times bestseller list, and in fact, Publishers Weekly said that Connelly is today's Dostoevsky of crime literature. As a crime reporter turned novelist, Connelly has sold over 45 million copies of his books worldwide, and those same books have been translated into 39 different languages. He has won every major mystery writing award available, and he's also a bit of a TV star. Michael can often be seen on the hit ABC television show Castle, playing himself as one of the fictional Castle's recurring poker buddies. Michael Connelly is making just a few stops on this nationwide book tour for his newest novel, The Black Box, and we are fortunate that one of those stops is right here in Traverse City. Earlier today, he told us that he likes to visit at least one new place on every book tour that he goes on to where he's never been before. And guess what? Traverse City is that place on this book stop. So with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bryan Gruley and Michael Connelly to Traverse City and to the City Opera House stage.
Thanks.
So this is how Mick Jagger feels. Wow.
Can't see anybody.
Yeah, that's cool. Hi, it's so great to be up north. You know, I'm from Detroit, and Mike, if you're from downstate and you come up here, you come up north. We all call this up north. Now, the UP, that's a different thing. That's the UP. This is up north, and it's the most beautiful place in the whole country, isn't it? And it's Mike's first visit up here. So, thanks for coming, man.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for supporting this program. It was well known to me for a few years now, a couple years now, so I'm glad I got the invite.
We're glad to have you. I just want to tell you, as a writer and a reader, why I like Mike Connelly, not that he's a good guy, but as a reader of his books.
One of us switching. That's yours, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Wow, they have beer on stage. Just like Mick Jagger. Yeah. He's even older than us. I read one of Mike's books many years ago, The Poet, which happens to be about a journalist. And when I read it, I thought, wow, this is... I always wanted to write novels since I was a little kid, and I was busy bringing up kids and being a journalist and writing for the Detroit News and other papers. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I can do this. And what attracts me about Mike's fiction is, in a way, a lot of it's from the head because he's a reporter and he does the work that is required for all of you to suspend your disbelief for a few hours or a few days or whatever it takes. So he knows forensic technique, he knows the gang culture, he knows how murderers work, he knows how police officers work, he knows how Harry Bosch works. But that's not the whole thing. There are a lot of authors who can do all of that stuff. It's what comes from here, the heart, that makes these books different. And what's cool about this is I get to hang out with him now. And I remember one of my favorite novels in the whole world, and maybe I'm dated or whatever, but it is The Catcher in the Rye. And in the middle of the novel, Holden Caulfield is talking about, I think it's Somerset Maugham, whom I've never read, but Holden liked him. And he said, he's one of those guys that when you read him, you just kind of want to go spend some time and hang out with him. And so, here I am.
Cool.
That's cool. So, Mike, tell us about your tour. Where else are you going? Where have you been? Where are you going?
This is, I guess, smack dab in the middle. I started in Phoenix, went to Houston, went to Chicago last night, and now I'm here, and tomorrow I'm in Portland. And then...
in Portland, Maine?
Portland, Oregon.
Oregon?
Yep. And then down to L.A. for a few days.
Your old stomping grounds.
Right.
And then you're done for a while?
I have a few days off, and then I have New York for one night.
Cool. It's a great place to visit on other people's money.
Absolutely.
New York City.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little about your life. I mean, you've sold 45 million novels, books. You live in Tampa. Just, when you're not touring, what's your life? What do you do? What do you do every day?
Well, I try to write every day if I'm not promoting. I do two things in life, write and promote, and luckily for me, most of it is writing. The wide majority of my days are spent writing. My wife carries or handles all the business aspects and IRS stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I have to only do two things: write books and promote them.
So you have an office. Mike lives in Tampa. So
I have.
Is that where you do most of your writing? Right in the office, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't write at a desk. I haven't in years. I write on a laptop, and I like to sit on a couch. And
me too. I like to do that.
And so I do have an office per se, but I have spots in my house, and I have
different venues.
Yeah, and you go to the place where you have a groove. In the beginning of writing a book, I'm very particular about creating an environment that matches what worked for me, 20 years ago when I wrote my first book. We had a very small apartment, and I pretty much set up a writing room and a walk-in closet so I could keep out all kinds of light, noise. We lived near a freeway in L.A., and that worked. And so when I start a book, I have an office where I have blackout shades that I actually just have to push a button and all the shades come down. It's very scientific and all that.
Batman-esque.
Yeah, and I turn on a single lamp that I've owned for 20 years and has always been over my right shoulder when I've written. And that's just to get, the starting a book is the hardest thing, so that's just to get me into a well-known comfort zone that I've written 25 books, at least started 25 books that way. And then when it gets going and I get some momentum, I start moving around the house and, we also have a detached guest house, and I'll go in there, and I kind of seek wherever it seems to work.
And you like dead quiet?
No, it depends on if I'm writing a Harry Bosch book. I often am playing the kind of music that will be in the book or that he's
Art Pepper,
listening to. Yeah. If I mention whatever I mention in a book, that was playing when I wrote that page. And
So we should skip that Alice Cooper chapter?
yeah. And I wrote one book called Void Moon, where the whole action kind of took place very quickly, and there's a lot of time in a car, and the protagonist listens to the same CD through the whole song, whole book. Only references are to one CD, and the problem was it took me nine or 10 months to write that book, and I was listening to it over and over again for 9 or 10
Which
months.
CD is this?
I blanked it from my memory because it's...
This sounds like my upbringing.
It was Lucinda Williams. I still listen to it. Lucinda Williams.
Was it Car Wheels on a Gravel Road?
Yeah. So, great album.
Yeah, when I grew up, my dad, whenever my dad got a new album, O.C. Smith, Little Green Apples, Glenn Campbell, by the time I get to Phoenix, he would put it on, and then that's all we heard for 6 months. And later I can sing all the songs off that Glenn Campbell album if you like. So, is there light? Do you like light? You like it dark?
Well, I wrote my first book, or actually my first 3 books, when I was still a journalist. So I was journalist by day and writing at night, and that worked. And it's everyone has these little things that they do.
Yeah, I like mornings.
Yeah, so I now write in the morning, but I try to make it feel like dark. And I'm really talking about just getting going. I don't have to write a whole book that way anymore, but that closet where I started writing worked really well. So, I don't know, paranoia or whatever, I try to recreate that situation.
But you're doing this in the mornings mostly, in Tampa?
Yeah, nowadays I will get up around 5 and write. And
then you're done by...
Well, it depends where you are in a book. If you get momentum going and everything's going well, then I keep writing till, I need to go to sleep. I'll write all day. You stop for meals and stuff like that. But in the beginning, a good day for me is to start writing at 5, take my daughter to school at 8, and then write till lunch. And then it's all about gathering momentum. And the more you get into a story, the more momentum you have, and the days become longer, and the writing count or the word count gets bigger, and that's how it goes. And so eventually, I would say 60% of the book is written in the last 3-4 months.
And do you look at word, the little word count thing on?
I look at it, but
I look at it.
I only look at it knowing that I need 100,000 words. I don't have a daily. I just want to move the story a step forward, and a step can actually be a paragraph or a great piece of dialogue. But more likely, or hopefully it's more. Hopefully it's a chapter. But I don't have anything like, I've written my 6 pages, I'm done. I don't. That's not how I've never done it. Never done it that way.
And your daughter's 15, right?
Yeah.
What's her name?
Callie.
Nice. So you have a great life.
Yeah.
So let's go back.
Why do you say that sarcastically?
No, I didn't. You have a great life. I want this life. I do all that, and then I go to work. My dad used to say, this working shit, never going to be popular. He was right about that. So let me just read, just very briefly. Harry Bosch could hear the helicopter up there, somewhere above the darkness, circling up in the light. Why didn't it land? Why didn't it bring help? Harry was moving through a smoky, dark tunnel, and his batteries were dying. The beam of the flashlight grew weaker every yard he covered. He needed help. He needed to move faster. He needed to reach the end of the tunnel before the light was gone, and he was alone in the black. That's the first appearance of Harry Bosch, 1992. And that end of that line, Harry Bosch was alone in the black. Now, do you remember writing those? I'm not trying to test you or challenge you or anything, but I mean, you had to, you write, and some things you remember and some things you don't. But this was your first book, and you had to choose those words and choose that scene. And I'm sure as a young writer, you were very conscious of it because you'd never had a book published. He was alone in the black, and it's such a stark image for Harry. In particular, it just fits Harry.
Well, yeah, I mean, also in the first book, you always baby it too long, so I'm sure I rewrote that or studied it several times. But the thing I'm conscious about, even from the beginning, was, you have a hope that this character or this book will get published, and then you get to return to the character. And so I said some things in the book. It's funny, that's the first paragraph. I haven't read it in a long time, but that first paragraph, I think, is thematic of the whole series. It's about a guy going through a tunnel in different ways. And so that set the stage for it there. The Alone in the Black, I'm also realizing, I also kind of bookended that with my second book. The last line of my second book is Alone with the Dead. And so, the aloneness, the blackness, the light, the lost light, the tunnel imagery, all that stuff is all hopefully seen all through the books. And in my head, that's how I view the series, as a tunnel.
But it's easy, and I'm not trying to be a jerk here. It's easy to say that now, but back then you were this young guy with those big glasses, and I saw those pictures, and
they were in
I
style.
didn't bring any. I promise I didn't bring any. But then, did you know you were going to write another Harry Bosch novel?
No,
you'd already written 2 novels that didn't work out, like a lot of novelists.
Yeah, no, you always have the hope that you'll. I loved series fiction. Ross MacDonald, John D. MacDonald, guys who had written many, many books about the same character, and so you go into it hoping that's what, or thinking and hoping that's what you want to do. You don't know what will happen, but just because you don't know what will happen doesn't mean you don't set the stage.
Right. But you knew that much, that you wanted to write more than one book about Harry Bosch.
Yeah, definitely. I planted seeds for what might come.
And were there themes you wanted to explore in that first book, The Black Echo? Which is a great title, by the way. I love that title.
I think they're covered in that thing. Someone trying to escape their past or deal with their past and learn something from it, or take it and use it as the fire that they can light now to accomplish things. As you said, I had written a couple books that I never sent to anyone. I knew they shouldn't be published, and I really had a view of it as I was holding off creating a family. I had made a deal with my wife that I could let me write 1 full weekend day and 4 nights a week to try to get a book published. And I'd gone through 2 books in about 5 years, and it didn't happen. And I was aware that I was feeling like 3 strikes and you're out. So this would be my third book, and it had to do it, or I'd be happy to be. I worked at a great newspaper it was great at the time, and had a great time, fun time, a coveted job in journalism. So everything was still good in my life, but this is what I wanted to do. And I knew this was my last shot. I felt that this was my last shot at it, because if this didn't work, we were going to start having kids, and I would be taken away from the opportunity. So I don't know exactly how I got on this rant, but
It's not a rant.
But I was taking care.
Okay, that fifth night you watched basketball, right?
I was aware was that what was at stake for me. Someone who, since I was 19, wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write these kind of books. And sure, I was a writer by day at a newspaper, but this is what I wanted. And so I think under that kind of pressure, and knowing it was my last shot, or feeling it was my last shot, I really took something to it that I didn't take in the first 2 times, first 2 tries.
Wow. So you're like, what were you then? In your 30s, right? Early 30s?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, I've wanted to write these books my whole life, and if I don't do this, then that's it. I'm done. I just have to.
Or I'm done for now, and then I'll have kids, and maybe when they go to college, I'll have time to do this. That kind of thing.
And were there explicit themes you wanted to get across, and you wanted to explore in that book?
Well, I was a newspaper reporter, and you develop a certain ego, especially I was covering crime and courts and things like that in Los Angeles. And you build this ego thing about where you think you know what's going on in the city that other people don't. You think you're a prince of the city. And so I wanted to take that into this book. So I wanted this book, I don't know about themes and things like that, but I wanted this book to be a book that people who knew L.A. would read and say, man, this guy knows stuff about L.A. that I don't know yet.
Really?
That was really all.
So it was mainly L.A.?
It was definitely L.A. I mean, it's funny. It's like a tunnel vision of not really realizing the world. Like, I had no idea that, L.A. in publishers' eyes is a great place to set a protagonist, because they know it's got a value around the world that other publishers and readers in France and Japan and so forth are interested in L.A. I knew nothing about that. I later, of course, benefited from it, but I was trying to show what I knew about L.A., and I thought the audience would be L.A.
And Harry?
And what about him?
Why Harry? I mean, was
Why
there some
Harry?
antecedent for him in your personal experience, or why him?
No, well, I wanted to use, I was thinking, there's a lot of books. You go into a bookstore, there's lots of books. What did I have that these people didn't? I had access. I had a press pass. Every day I talked to about 100 detectives. I went into 5 or 6 police stations. And, I didn't think a lot of crime novelists were doing that. And so I wanted to use that. I was more or less nurtured as a writer on the private eye novel. I love them. And I loved reading them. But when it came to write my own books, I thought I would just be another guy writing a PI novel. I'd rather be someone who's writing from experience and knowledge. And I had some people that would be able to help me, some cops and so forth that trusted me, or I trusted them to give them pages and say, what do I got wrong? That kind of thing. So I kind of used my position as the springboard. But I brought all the stuff I loved about the PI, private eye, to these books. The classic private eyes are about outsiders looking at society, and I had a contradiction there. I was writing about a detective who carries a gun and a badge, and there's nothing more emblematic of the state than a cop. But I wanted to make him feel like he was in it but not of it, that he was somehow outside looking in. And
That's the great thing about Harry.
well, that was the difficult thing to put together. Yeah, hopefully.
Now, if there are anybody who edited Mike back in those days, I'd love to hear confirmation that he talked to 100 detectives a day.
It was the LAPD. I had to cover. Yeah, that's an exaggeration. But I had.
That's good. Just cop.
I had to cover seven police stations that had, their murder squads, their robbery squads, and so forth. And it was back then it was competitive. There was 3 newspapers in town, and you didn't want to get beat, so you did cover. Yep. It wasn't 100; it was 75. Does that make you happier?
Whatever you can live with, pal.
All right.
So, on page 9 of the Black Echo, Harry is he's getting ready for the day, and he stared at his red-rimmed 40-year-old eyes for a long moment in the mirror. Then he studied the gray hairs that were steadily crowding out the brown in his curly hair. Even the mustache was growing gray. He had begun seeing flecks of gray in the sink when he shaved. He touched a hand to his chin, but decided not to shave. He left his house then without changing even his tie. Now, this is like, and on the next page, there's a little bit more description of Harry. But mostly, there's very little description of Harry, right? In all 18 Harry Bosch books.
Right.
You know what? I hadn't read this one. I went back and read it, and I didn't know that's what I imagined a totally different guy. But
yeah, no, I think it adds up to 3 or 4 pages out of all of them. I mean, you write in the way that you read, I think, and I love to conjure images when I read of the protagonists and all the characters. And so I just have described Harry very literally, or if that's a word, not a lot of words. But hopefully enough words to kind of instill a conjuring in every reader's head of who he is and what he looks like, what he sounds like, all that stuff.
But readers, and all you know better than me, but they invent their own images of what they are. When people ask me if I'm Gus Carpenter, who's my character, and well, no, Gus is shorter, balder, single. He lives in northern Michigan. He's a defrocked journalist. And yet they have their own ways of doing that. And yet, I think sort of, particularly in a series, Mike, at least from my reading, the author develops the character, and reading over this long arc of stories of yours, the character sort of, it's vice versa. The character, I'm not trying to say Harry Bosch is you or vice versa, but the character has an effect, and there's this symbiotic relationship. For instance, on page 26 of The Black Echo, Harry says, there are no coincidences. And then later, he stops him. He's about to say, it's a coincidence, and he stops himself. And it's almost like you're writing your rules for mystery, for being a mystery and thriller writer. Because it's easy to have a coincidence to make the plot move. But to Harry, that would be unethical. I'm serious. But are you doing that for yourself?
No.
Okay. We'll move on now.
I think, actually, when I think and he says there are no coincidences several times through the books.
Yes, yep.
And I think it's to underline that we all know there are coincidences, and there's some in the books, and they're unexplained by Harry. You can't understand that. I think, when you're in an investigation, you're very suspicious of coincidences, but life is full of them. And I just like to set up stuff, like, if you want to call it rules, and then the rules don't hold up.
Right.
Even Harry's main rule, everybody counts or nobody counts, he can't look back at his life and say he's adhered to that rule himself. It's an ideal.
Certainly not with the people who did what they did with Annika Jespersen.
Right.
They don't count to him in the end.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about keeping things in motion. Bosch was an impatient detective. To him, case momentum was everything. How to get it, how to keep it, how to guard against being distracted from it. Were you that way as a cop reporter?
I think so, possibly. I wanted to write these books before I was a cop reporter. I became a journalist to get to this end. And so there was an anxiety in me all along, like, when am I going to be able to be the writer? So I think I was an impatient reporter, and impatient in my life and all that through those years.
But there's a single-mindedness to Harry that strikes me about you, reading about your writing. Did you write today? You probably wrote today, right?
No, I didn't.
Yesterday? Please say yes.
No, I'm in a stage where
you're in a tour. Okay.
Yeah. No, I used to be a road warrior where I would write on tours, but it really is where I'm at in a book, and whether it's good to keep writing or it's good to put it aside and not think about it. And so I'm in the not think about it.
Okay.
So it's the.
So you have another book going.
Yeah. And I'm in a stage between, like, drafts and things like that. So I didn't mean to undercut that, because I think you talk about the single-mindedness.
I've read about the way you go about doing books, and
yeah, I have.
It's very much like he does his investigations. To me,
I'm about to say I had or I have. I don't know whether to say had or have, but at least in the early stages of my career, I had a very strong drive to get published off. And I felt like I waited too long to get published. My first book came out when I was 36. And I felt that, the very interesting job I had as a newspaper reporter took me away. And I think I was often thinking that I wish I had started sooner, or because there's a period in my life, mostly through my 20s, where I didn't write fiction at night. I was in thinking, I don't have to do it yet. I'm learning. I'm hanging out with cops, and I'm learning the craft of writing in a newspaper, and that will come around. Don't worry about it.
But you were right.
No, well, in a way, I wish I had started sooner.
Do you still have those doubts?
Yeah, because.
But do you think? So much of what you write it's very simply, anybody can understand it, but it has that authenticity because you were there. And you have those little tiny details that I'm sure, I mean, I could go through a book and point them out, and you know them. But you're there. And would you really be there if you hadn't had that time with all those cops? And would you have as many sources who help you write
No,
books?
I mean, I wouldn't have the exact same situation, but I don't think I had to cover cops 14 years, to start writing these books. I could have started at 8 or 9 or something. So, I
Start covering cops when you were 8 years old?
No, I mean after 8 or 9 years old. I mean, after 8 or 9 years on the job,
So, I always tell my kids life was not a race, but it seems
Well,
like
no one told me that, so I kind of felt like there was an urgency, and it came out of that 3-strike thing, where, and because I always thought it was 3 strikes, between second and third were a lot of years. My second book that I wrote went into a drawer. It was a learning experience. It was much better than the first book, but it wasn't good enough. But it was a number of years before I tried that third one, and I uprooted my life. I moved 3,000 miles from my home. I went through a lot of machinations so that I would be prepared and the world would be different for me when I tried my third time. But it took time.
And that scared you too, right? I think I read that you were afraid being away from L.A. you would lose your sense of...
Oh, no, I don't mean that. I mean,
I'm sorry.
I mean when I wrote the Black Echo. It came after I had moved from Florida to California.
I asked Dennis Lehane once a question about research. In his book, The Given Day, the prologue is about Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And they're on one of their barnstorming tours in the winter where they would go all over the South playing local yokels, and Gehrig would go back to the hotel and go to bed, and Ruth would go drinking and then go to bed with whoever wanted to go to bed with him. And I asked Lehane if he had done any research on that. And he said no. He said, I wanted it. He said, I knew enough about it that I wanted it to come right from my heart. And then he went and checked things. Like he found out that Ruth didn't have a big potbelly. This was early 1920s. He was actually lean and mean. And I think I read in one of your interviews, Mike, I'm writing contemporary Los Angeles from memory, and then I check my memory. Now you're an experienced reporter. How does the research and the fiction, how do those work together? And what do you do to make things authentic but still use your imagination?
Well, that was one reason why I moved away from Los Angeles. And saying I write it from memory is a little, facetious. I spend a lot of time in L.A. now.
Right.
I still go there probably once a month for a few days. But for the most part, when I'm writing these books, I'm 3,000 miles away. So when I'm over there, I'll check out. I do, geographic research, go to the places I want to write about. I don't take notes or photos or anything like that. I just go and see what they look like.
Really?
and hang out. And then I go back. Then I get on a plane, fly 3,000 miles away, and then I start writing about it. So it's kind of immediate memory. I don't want to act like I haven't been in LA in a long time and it's years of memories and things like that. It's just different. But when I was there, I was very repertorial. If I was writing a scene at Parker Center Police Department, I'd go down there that morning and I would hang around, or I'd go visit somebody in there, and then I go home and write that pretty much right away. I don't do that anymore. There's a space and there's time between all that kind of writing.
There's a scene in your new book, The Black Box, which is terrific, by the way. And you're at Harry is at a John Deere dealership in Modesto, California. And I looked it up, and there is a John Deere dealership at 2413 Crow's Landing Road, which Mike mentions, Crow's Landing Road, in Modesto. Did you go there and look?
Yeah.
Did you do any research on John Deere?
Not really. I mean, what's there? I noticed all their tractors are green.
I actually did a story on John Deere this year for Business Week, and the guy said, we could paint them any color, but we paint them green. It's like Henry Ford. Remember him? Did you? In one of the scenes, Harry is sitting on this street, and he's looking through the windows into the John Deere dealership, and he's watching a certain employee named Banks, Reggie Banks, doing what he does. Did you actually just sit on the street and look at it, or you just I don't know. I'm just curious as a reporter, how much reporting you did.
I think that part's made up.
Well, the whole thing's made up.
But, no, I mean, you know what?
I hope.
This is, how many people who read the book will have been in Modesto? Probably, a very, very, very tiny percentage. It's really about the writing process. And it comes back to me feeling that I'm a reporter, not a novelist. And so I go and I take the track that Harry Bosch will take in a book. And I do this often, like Nine Dragons. I went to Hong Kong and just followed the trail that he would take and, registered everything I could see. And then I write about it. And you weave in, fiction with where it should be. But for the most part, the geography is real. The VFW post down by the river, it's really there. The John Deere thing, the hotel that Harry Bosch stays in is real. That you catch your Wi-Fi from a guy who lives behind the hotel is real. You just use all these things and you find a way to put it all together and and it works because reading the book is there's similarities to writing the book, but for the most part, especially the time, it's quite different. And I have to find ways to be engaged and as Harry Bosch says, gather momentum and keep it. And for me, it's writing about real things that I've seen. And I might not be writing about them till 3 months after I saw them, but I can tap into that memory and blend it with some creativity, and that's how I end up creating these things.
So,
in fact, here's something that people won't believe when they read it. A big moment or section of this book, or an important part of this book, takes place on Hammett Road in Modesto, and that's not made up. That the Walnut Grove is on Hammett Road, and I thought, when
he goes through those, when he walks through there, and the animals.
Yeah. And I was thinking, people are going to think this is like some kind of nod to Dashiell Hammett, and it's just that's really there.
Heavy-handed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain things that are in reality that are just crazy.
Yep. There are no coincidences.
Was there wind? Was there a wind farm there with the wind thing? So you did an interview a few years ago many years ago, where you said Harry Bosch is dated. I think it's going to be. This is Mike talking. I think it's going to be really beg the question how long this guy can do this. How long could he keep going into the darkness without being totally swallowed by it? I don't want that to happen. I hope the overall arc of the series is that he is heading toward light. The light at the end of the tunnel and fulfillment. And so if that's my ultimate goal, to end this thing on a story where he finds that, it's got to come sooner rather than later. I don't think it will be believable to me, and if it's not believable to me, it won't be for the reader. You have this on tape. Maybe in 10 years, you'll bring this up to me. Well, it's 10 years.
Oh, yeah?
And you've written a lot of Bosch books. I didn't do this interview. I just found it.
No, well, now I am running out of time. If people have read the recent books, know that Harry's on a short lease. He's in a thing called a drop program and he has a finite number of days as a cop left, and I'm sticking with that. In fact, something might happen that make him leave the department before that. But if I don't want that to happen, he has, I think, because this book is set in this month, I think he has about 2 years and 9 months left. So hopefully I can write a hell of a lot of Harry Bosch books in 2 years and 9 months.
But back then, I mean, maybe that was just a bad day or something. But
I think it was very eloquently spoken. What do you mean?
Well, I don't know, but because when you read this interview, and there's more of this, if you like, I can go get some more. But it's almost like you're a little. I'm running out of things to say about Harry, but you've come up with more things to say. And do you think that has less to do with Harry than just about you growing up? Not that you weren't growing up. I mean, just
I think it has to do with realizing how cool it is that I'm given the opportunity to write about this character and what he means to me personally, and what he, you never want to say, you basically want to say you write for yourself. You put your head down, you write a story that you would like to read, and that you're confident that if it's something you're going to like to read, then there'll be people out there. But I don't know whether it's through social media or me doing book tours or so forth, but I know that Harry Bosch means something to a lot of people. And so it's something I really find, I guess in a way, sacred, and that I want to protect and nurture. And so maybe I gave that interview on a downturn where I thought it wouldn't be too much longer, but I think organically other things have come up that have helped resuscitate the series, if it needed resuscitation, or
I didn't mean to suggest.
To pivot the storyline, and two, right off the bat, you said that was 10 years ago. So in the last 10 years, Mickey Haller's come along and he's discovered a blood connection to Mickey Haller. I think that was a new cool dimension for Harry Bosch. And then most important of all is the development that he goes from being a guy who tries to be bulletproof and undercuts or sabotages all relationships so he doesn't have any, so he can't be gotten to, finds out he has a daughter and is gotten to, and now he's actually raising a 13-year-old daughter. So whatever I was thinking 10 years ago, I don't feel that way now. I feel time's going to run out before I'm done what I want to do with Harry Bosch, because there's a lot to do and a lot to say through him. Mm-hmm. And I just can't believe it, that like 20 years ago, the first book came out, and now a book comes out now where I think the heart of this book is his interactions with a 16-year-old daughter. It's just not where I saw things going, but I'm glad they're here.
That is a great part of the book, his reactions, or his relationship with Maddie. That's
the part I like writing the best.
A rounder character, even rounder. But it sounds like, as you're talking, that as much as you say, and I believe that you have to write for yourself. So it comes from your heart, but you feel a certain responsibility. Not as a writer, but as a storyteller, a creator of a myth. You're a myth maker now.
Well, the opportunity I've been given is just not something you can take lightly. I mean, it's different from when, I was starting the book and I was hoping I could get maybe 2 or 3 more Harry Bosch books. It's gone well beyond that, and I now have a 20-year arc of a character against a 20-year arc of a city and a society, and so it's gotten bigger than anything I ever thought could be, and so with that comes a certain responsibility. I mean, one of the things that people often say when I meet them, like out in the lobby and so forth, is, don't kill Harry, or, are you going to kill him, and it's like the farthest thing from my mind that I would think that, this guy who's been going through this tunnel for 20 years and all these difficulties and obstacles, that, that light is actually a shotgun or something like that. It's just not going to happen. But it's weird how it intrudes. It's a made up universe. The guy doesn't exist, but it does intrude into your psyche. And it becomes something where you feel responsible for something that doesn't even exist. Weird.
You could have him killed by a vampire, and then he would live forever. And your sales. Sorry.
My 14-year-old daughter suggested that.
God bless her. Is this your best book?
It's very hard to say that. I mean, I'm always enthused by what the latest book is because it's freshest in the mind. And I do believe that you should get better at what you're doing, so therefore it should be my best book. But, I'm always my harshest critic, and I have this idea, very cloudy idea of what I want to do with a book before I write it, and then I kind of make a judgment of it. And Some books have come closer to that ideal than others. This one didn't get as close to what I was hoping to do as others have, so it's hard for me to embrace it and say this is my best book.
Really?
But I coming back to the relationship between Bosch and his daughter, I'm extremely fulfilled by what's in that. And it's not a big part of the book, it's actually a very small part of the book, but
well,
sometimes...
in words, I would disagree with you, not with all due respect.
Oh,
I think it's a very big part of the book, but it's a small part in word count.
In word count,
exactly.
It's a seam through the book, but it's important because that's where his heart is and where his thinking is, and of course that would mean that's where my thinking and my heart is, and so that stuff I really love. And I don't usually look at books and say I love this part or something like that, but I really love Harry's daughter, and I love what's going on there.
For Harry, in all these books, there, like many, 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 many great novels, the redemption theme, or the lack thereof, is a recurring theme. And for Harry, it just seems to come in these small, begrudging doses. And you see more of it, I think, in the black box. And that's really what this is about for him, right? He's getting out of that tunnel, as you put it earlier.
Well, yeah, and he's also thinking, he's also obviously more than thinking, but he has this, father's knowledge that the world's bigger than him, and he has to think about that. And in many of the earlier books, it was all about the case, it was all about the moment,
right.
and he's not like that anymore.
But Harry, and it can actually be really funny, I have to read this one passage. It has a bad word in it. So if your 9-year-old is here, clap your hands over his or her ears. If your 9-year-old is reading Harry Bosch novels, you're probably not a good parent.
Not good.
If I could find it. Oh, it's 128. I'm sorry. So Harry's he's in the cop shop, and at the back of the cop shop, the back wall had the usual map of the city with black lines detailing the 18 police divisions. Above the map were the top 10, color 8x10s of the 10 top assholes of the moment in Hollywood division. Bosch noticed one was a morgue shot. The kid was dead, but still made the list. Now that's an asshole, he thought. That's a great line. That's the kind of line I'll hear from a cop buddy in my hockey dressing room.
Well, that's, I wish I could say, yeah, I made that up. I'm sure that came from a real story or a real experience. I know the dead guy on the top 10 list is not made up.
Now, in one of the interviews I read with you, you were talking about a writer, Juan Carlos Blake, who said the trouble, and maybe you didn't say this, maybe the interviewer said it, Mike, I don't remember. But Juan Carlos Blake said the trouble with a series is that it doesn't have the threat of death. That, unless it's Marvel Comics or DC Comics, you don't really think the character is going to die. And that's a problem. That the reader needs to think that the person they care about the most might die. Of course, they're going to die eventually, but what do you think about that?
What did I say there?
I don't remember. Yeah. It must not have been facetious or funny enough.
Well, I think there's a validity to that, but at the same time, you can create all kinds of other tensions and threats and so forth. We're talking about Harry and his daughter, the fragile feeling he feels about being ill-equipped to be a father, because it's just not his thing. And then when suddenly a 13-year-old is living with him, and he doesn't know what to do, and he makes the wrong moves all the time. I mean, the threat of those kind of mistakes, I think you can supplant that thing that, Harry's going to be alive at the end of this thing. And you can make up for it. And so you don't have that threat, but there's a lot of other stuff that you can put into the book that ratchets up tension and things like that, and worry and hope for characters and things like that. So, to dismiss the idea I'm never going to write series because of that concern or complaint, I think that, is the missing of the boat.
And by the way, these scenes with Maddie where Harry will make the tiniest mistake. And I'm a father. I have 2 daughters who are now grown and my best friends. But when they were Maddie's age, you didn't even know you made a mistake. And you made a huge mistake. Fathers, you guys know who you are. And it was just, it's terrific what you did there. That's not a question. I'm reading, I'm like, wow, he really knows about this.
Including the text apologies. You're in the same house, but you're texting each other apologizing?
Yeah. Nothing like texts. But, eventually, you don't have to literally kill Harry, but he's going to die. Die to us. Mm-hmm. He's going to stop. Whether it's, God forbid, we're both going to die eventually, but that you're not done with Harry. And so have you thought about that? I mean, this guy is so bound up in your own life, even though he's fictional. But you have this responsibility that you've acknowledged. And have you thought about that? It's almost like thinking about your own mortality, isn't it?
A little bit. I mean, I have a real contradiction because I know that the forward progression of the series as Harry Bosch as cop is coming to an end in, say, 2 years, rounded off to 2 years, 2 books. And in some ways, I think that should be it. I mean, let that stand and not put him as a private eye or a guy who mentors his daughter as she becomes a cop. Just end it that way. End it with whatever that light is, that moment of fulfillment, or maybe it's more than a moment, but that self-realization that he's been seeking, and that would be a very artistic and credible way to end it. But at the same time, I love spending a year writing about him, and of course I've created other characters, and I have the wherewithal to create even more, and will do that. But at the same time, I don't know what my life would be like if I did not have Harry Bosch to go to. And so there's 3 things I can do. One is to let it be and let it stand. He's been in 18 books so far, and if I did him in 2 more, that's an even 20. That's pretty cool. And
25 might be cooler, though.
Yeah.
It's kind of a round number.
That's what my agent said. But
imagine that.
But or then I can also fill in blanks. There's all kinds of hints at his life. Going all the way back to Vietnam and so forth, and that's really intriguing to me too, and very challenging. And so. I don't know, but I have a couple of years at least, to think about what to do. But,
Isn't it?
But going back to your basic question, my life without Harry Bosch, I hope I'm writing for at least another 20 years. So if I have to spend the next 15 years without writing about Harry Bosch, I don't know what that would be like, because I do have a very strong connection to him and how he looks at the world and what he has to say and so forth.
Isn't it great to know as readers that as wrapped up as you might be in Mike's characters, he's way more. I'm not making a joke. I'm seriously. And feels more responsibility, not just to Harry and his writing and himself, but to you. That relationship, Writing's like you throw a bottle off a beach with a message in it, and you hope somebody picks it up, first of all. They hope then they take the message out of the bottle, secondly, and then you hope they read from the beginning to the end. And if they do that a lot of times, then you get to be
it's a weird
lucky guy.
Form of artistic expression. One of the people I was talking about last night about how it starts with a solo mission. The writer has to write this story, and then it kind of blows up, and like here we are with several people talking about this, but those of you who got the book, you're going to go back and it's going to become a solo thing again, that you'll read the book by yourself and take from it what you will. So it starts as a small thing and ends as a small thing, and in the middle it becomes other things. I baffled you with that one, I know.
I'm not answering questions here, pal. When I get to 45 million books, you can come and interview me. Right. So looking back on when you first you were anxious, eager to write those first books, and you wrote the two, and then you wrote The Black Echo. What your goals were then and what they are now, how are those different as a writer, as a guy, person?
I won't be believed, but I don't think they're that different. I mean, when I was writing that first book, I wanted to open up a world, have a book that would be a world that it was inhabited by a very believable character. And so that's the kind of goal I have with every book. I mean, I think I have different tasks or challenges with the books now. I mean, back then, the Harry Bosch canvas was blank, and now when I write about Harry Bosch, I have a bag of 18 books I'm carrying on my shoulder, and I have to live with everything in those books and find ways of expanding the character without contradicting anything. And that's the biggest challenge about writing about him now.
You have all these facts.
Right, I have to live with
when you
the
write
facts.
a series, you create facts. You can't make Harry, 36 again.
So that's,
aside from the geographical fact and all that stuff, but when you create a world, like, I can't make Starvation Lake a 22-mile-long lake. It's a 7-mile-long crescent. And once you create it, then you have to live with that. And now you have to, and the more you write about Harry in particular, the more, I don't want to say you're boxed in, but you have to deal with the facts.
Boxed in is actually a good way of saying it. There's stuff that it's either already been said and you can't really explore it again, or it's been said and you have to incorporate that into whatever you're doing now. You got to live with it. And, it's not, oh my God, it's horrible. It's like, it is what it is. It's like anyone's life. You live with what you've done in your life, and you move forward. But that's the challenge of writing a Harry Bosch book to me is digging deeper, finding something new, expanding what's already there without contradicting what's already known.
I'm betting 5 more books.
5 more? Okay.
At least. So I'm proud to be from Michigan because of this. I'm proud to be from Michigan anyway, but because this is such a great series. And the purpose of this series is to encourage young writers. And so, Mike, if there are young writers in the audience, or their parents or uncles or aunts or grandparents are here, would you tell them, what advice do you have for young writers who want to write nonfiction or journalism or fiction or poetry or film or whatever it is? What's your best advice to them?
It's funny, it's such a mystical process that here I am, I guess I'm considered an old veteran, 25 books, and I have a hard time explaining how I do it. So it's then hard to translate into this is what you got to do, or these are the rules. You're in your introduction, pretty much you went like this and said it comes from there, and I think that's the important thing. You got to you never lick your finger and hold it up into the winds and say, boy, which way is the wind blowing? What do they want? It's what you want to write about, and so you really got to learn to put your head down. Focus on something that's inside you, some kind of story or some kind of character, and draw that person out. It's very hard to do, especially when you're young, and you get better at it the more you do it. And so in that is the real key about, if you're going to be a writer, then write. Don't say you're going to be a writer, and think about it. Do it. I mean, it's and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it, and the more you'll learn. Every book is a learning process. Every story, short story, every poem is a learning process, and it will certainly help the next effort.
I'm going to be a little repetitive here, but it bears repeating. If you're young or old or whatever, you want to be a writer, there's only one way. You have to write. To sit or stand and take a pencil or a pen or a laptop or whatever it is, a chisel into concrete. You must write. That's the only way. There's no software program, except James Patterson has one. There's no software program that will enable you to, you must just sit there and write a lot of crap before you get there. I have a little saying on my laptop that Jack London supposedly said, which is, you can't wait around for inspiration. You have to hunt it down with a club. which means do the work. And so I think it's time for questions from the audience. Is Jack London out there somewhere? Wow.
Wow.
Woo! This is when Mick Jagger goes backstage. And if you would just stand, whoever it is, and say your first name. No, I think, what are we? What? Hank? Well, I thought you had the microphone. Jim, you're next. Can you give Jim that? And young lady?
My name is Mariam.
Hi.
I read recently that you had finished writing The Safe Man. Is that available?
The Safe Man was a short story I wrote about 8 years ago. And it was part of a collection where people didn't acknowledge what they had written, because I'm a guy who's known as a crime writer, thriller writer, mystery writer. So I was supposed to contribute a story that wasn't under any of those genres. So I wrote a ghost story. And it was published in a book by other writers who wrote what they were not expected to write. And it listed our names, but it didn't say what story we wrote. And we all signed a contract saying we would not acknowledge our story for 7 years. So the 7 years is up, so I now acknowledge that I wrote The Safe Man, which is a ghost story. And 7 years ago, it was available in a book. Right now, they just put it out as a short story, and that's where you can get it right now. But you can also find the book. The book was called The Secret Society of Demolition Writers. That's true.
Snappy.
Yep.
Jim?
Yeah, given the nature of the mystery, do you write it backwards from conclusion to beginning?
Great question.
I never I don't outline my books. I'm not advising people to go that way. That's just the way I go, and it's a risky way because I mess up a lot and throw out lots of pages every book. But in a way, you do start from the back. I don't ever, sitting at the screen and there's 0 words and I need 100,000 words. I don't write the first word till I kind of pretty much know what the last word will be, know what's going to happen at the end, and because I need if I'm not going to have an outline that tells me every day this is where we are and what you got to do, I at least need to have that light at the end of the tunnel that I'm heading towards with my story.
Is there a question in the balcony?
Yes. I'm wondering how his writing, Harry Bosch, changed you as a person. I mean, he comes across some very unsavory, unhealthy, sick characters.
Unhealthy. I like that word.
Well, I think I am saved from that darkness because of people like Harry Bosch. I mean, because he's the guy, the unsung noble guy who's willing to go into the darkness in these worlds that are pretty realistic, and that's what I love writing about him. That's his essential sacrifice, that he goes into darkness every day and has to deal with how much gets into him and how he can be healthy and safe. And I've seen that as a reporter in the best cops that I've known, and that kind of unsung nobility is really the engine behind the whole series. And so I can write about really bad people in really dark parts of the world, but in these stories is this guy, this noble guy, and so he saves me from the darkness.
I think, too, there's a certain curiosity, and you can call it macabre or disgusting or whatever, but about bad people. And when you're writing about them on a page, you're safe. And you can write about a pedophile or a serial killer, a Hannibal Lecter or a Darth Vader, and it's okay. But you get to experience, you get to actually manipulate these characters. And for lack of a better word, it's fun. And what you're trying to do I think, at least I have, and I have a few bad people in my books, is try to show people how bad they are. And usually in my books, they're bullies. Through whatever mechanisms they have, they're trying to bully people who are weaker than them. And I personally don't like bullies. So I want the good guys to come out ahead. But the only way to make the good guys good is to make the bad guys bad.
Hi. Thanks for coming to our town, both of you. I was intrigued by your discussion about your future life without Harry Bosch, after having such a long relationship with him. I'm wondering if you could compare Harry Bosch's legacy with your own personal legacy as you see it.
Well, I mean, I think as a writer, I've written other books that Harry's not in and so forth, and had different measures of success with those, but I am firmly in belief that what will stand for me as a writer, when I'm done writing, will be Harry Bosch, and I've drawn that conclusion for a very long time. Harry has been slow to success. I had, when I would jump off of Harry and do a book like The Poet or Bloodwork, these things were much bigger sellers and bigger critical acclaim and all that stuff came from the non-Harry Bosch. But I kept knowing, I think Harry Bosch will catch up to these books, and I'm going to keep plugging away with Harry Bosch because there's something about that character that's entwined with me and my self-imaging of who I am as a writer. And so, yeah, we're certainly entwined, and that gets back to that question about, like, what do I do? Do I let the 20 books of Harry Bosch stand and go on to other things, and hopefully, I have another 20 years of writing, and that would be, I think, a strange life to live, writing year after year and not having Harry Bosch in the picture, because I think he is my legacy.
10 more books. Next one.
Hi. It took you a few books to flush out the kinship between Mickey and Harry. Was that the plan when you introduced Mickey?
When I introduced him, yes. But when I introduced Mickey Haller, I didn't have this long plan that eventually I would come out with Harry Bosch's half-brother. What happened was I was inspired to write about the Lincoln Lawyer. I met a real guy in L.A. who worked out of the back seat of his Lincoln, and he told me how he did it and the reasons why and so forth. And so I thought, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to write about a character like this, and I thought about it and researched and so forth for about 3 or 4 years before I ever sat down to write the book. And when I sat down to write the book, what I love is connecting my stories either obviously or almost subliminally. All the books are connected. Even a book like Chasing the Dime is connected in a semi-secret way to Harry Bosch. And so I had to look at how am I going to connect this guy to Harry Bosch, and that's when I got what seemed at the time the genius idea of going back to one of the very earliest second book of Harry Bosch, where there's a 3-page section where Harry thinks about the father he didn't know and who he was, and I took that name and gave it to the Lincoln Lawyer as his son. And so I connected the series. And then, the Lincoln Lawyer was very successful for me, but as I was writing it, I didn't know, I felt it was a very risky book. I write about protagonists who are seeking out the guilty, who are righting wrongs, and here I'm writing about a guy who's gaming the system for people that don't deserve it. And so the writing process of Lincoln Lawyer, I thought, was a very risky thing I was doing. So I wasn't thinking, there'll be like 4 books and they'll be brothers and they'll be working together and all this kind of stuff. I didn't think about that. And then the Lincoln Lawyer was pretty well received, and that started me thinking about, if I brought him back, is there a way I could connect him, directly connect him with Harry? And so some of those stories happen that way.
I just want to ask, Mike, did you do a feature story by chance for the LA Times about the guy who worked out of the back of his Lincoln?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't working at the Times.
Oh, was this? This was.
Yeah, it was actually. I had a I'm a fan of the LA Dodgers, and for a long time had a tradition of going to the opening day baseball, and which is always a day game, and the stadium is pretty close to downtown. So you see all these men playing hooky. They're wearing shirts and ties at a baseball game. And so I was...
We have that in Detroit.
Okay. It's probably every city.
In the World Series this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, anyway, there's a guy in a shirt and tie next to me, so I asked him,
Wow.
We started a conversation, and turned out he was a lawyer, and I asked him where his office was, and that's when he said it's actually my Lincoln Town Car.
Cool. That would have been a great story, though, if you were still at the LA Times.
Yeah, but see, how can you say there are no coincidences when serendipity happens all the time?
Serendipity is different than coincidence.
Oh, the copy editor's back.
Well, it has more syllables. We have more questions.
Up here. I was just wondering, as somebody who aspires to be a great writer, how many drafts on average do you go through for each of your books? It's I know it's something that most people would say 1 or 2, but I know a couple people that would say 5 or 6. Is there any number that you feel comfortable with, or are they just varying for each book?
They vary a little bit, but I would say at least 3. And I'm because when my first draft, I just put everything in that I can think of, and they're large and unwieldy, and then I know it's got to be cut down and so forth. So my drafts, as I go through them, the stories get leaner, and hopefully momentum in the reading process. That's how it's formed. So I usually go from like 120,000 to 110, and then 100, and that's what I try to do. So it's usually at least 3. I also start every morning by rewriting what I did the day before. I think that's a really important rewrite right there. Just to have slept on something and then go back and look at it. It's fresh, but yet you see it differently. So every morning I rewrite, and then I just do that process at least 3 times. But some books, that would be like the Harry Bosch model. But like when I did Lincoln Lawyer, I did many more rewrites. Probably did 5 or 6. After about 3 or 4, it was when I started giving pages of the manuscript. I'm not a lawyer, so I was writing about a lawyer, so I gave the manuscript to the lawyers to read and to help me get it right, tell me what I got wrong. A lot of times people will read pieces of my manuscript and give me a fabulous piece of dialogue. What I would say in this situation is this, and it's real, and it's part of the process where the reader is hopefully nodding their head, not even realizing they're nodding. They're thinking like, this is the real world. This is how it happens. This is what they do say. And a lot of that comes in the later drafts for me, and not the creative genius that comes from somebody else's mouth.
I want to jump in here too because it's a young guy. It's different for me because I have to go to my day job, and so I rarely rewrite what I wrote the day before. I might if I wrote 800 words in an hour and a half on a Tuesday, on Wednesday morning, I probably back up into the first 100 words and then rewrite that. But mainly what I'm trying to do is get the story down, which to me is a lot like reporting, because I don't really know what's going to happen. I may have a little bit of an idea and where it's going to end and everything, but I'm just trying to get the story down, and then I'll go back and fix it. But I'll tell you a horror story about rewrites. I mean, most of mine go through 3 or 4 drafts like Mike's. I wrote Starvation Lake, my first book, and it went through a bunch of 26 rejections, and it finally got published. I got a 3-book deal, so then I had to write a second book, and I wrote the second book, and I turned it in like 2 weeks before I was going on tour for my first novel, which I've been dreaming about since I was a boy, since reading the Hardy Boys. And I turned it in, and I knew it was shitty. Sorry. That's a nice word for this. And my editor called me, and she said, "We have a lot of work to do." And I basically threw the whole book away. And it was due the next month. And I told my agent, I need another year to fix this. Because the first book was going to do really well. It was getting good reviews and everything. And I need another year. And she got me 7 months, and I said, well, I wrote a really bad book in a year and a half. Just imagine what I can do. in 7 months. But it worked out, and I actually love rewriting. I love it. I love the physical feel of striking out sentences and words, because usually when you're getting rid of things, it's getting better. Usually, not always.
Yeah.
Usually it's getting better when you're getting rid of things. And last thing, you said you want to be a great writer? This reminds, I just got a note from a guy I went to Notre Dame with, Brian Doyle, who's one of the great essayists in the United States. He lives in Portland. Great, beautiful essays. And he said, when we were at Notre Dame, we wanted to be writers with a capital W. But now we're just writers. We've made it. Just be a writer with a small w. That means button chair, write. Every day, write. You're welcome. Good question.
Hi, Mr. Connelly and Mr. Gruley. It's an
No,
honor.
my dad is Mr. Gruley.
Okay.
Brian and Mike.
Brian
Please.
and Mike, it's an honor to be here, and I sincerely mean that.
We're honored to be here.
Mike, was there one particular detective that stood out in all your years that served more as an inspiration for the Harry Bosch character than all the others that you came into contact with?
I would say yes and no. I knew I was about to use 100 detectives a day line, but I talked
75.
No, I took stuff from a lot of people, and but a couple things stood out to me. I'd written these 2 novels about detectives that no one has ever seen, and I knew shouldn't be seen, and they were missing something, and it was like the emotional context of a character. And I had 2 experiences that I think led me down the right path, and they weren't like detectives I was close to. But one was I was covering a trial of a murder, and the detective was describing the crime scene, and he started crying. And so I realized this was a guy who lets his work get inside. And for the most part, those guys are rare. Mostly it's people who are able to have a family and assemble a normal life and not let the work get under their skin. But seeing this guy, in a public situation, start crying because of what happened to this victim really affected me. And led me towards looking at these things I had written and seeing what was missing. And in a very similar way, I got this great opportunity to spend a week with a homicide squad that was a rollout squad that would get a lot of cases. And I was told to stay with the lieutenant. You have full access, but stay on the lieutenant's hip. Don't get in the way. Don't smoke at a crime scene. All that kind of stuff. But during the week they had 3 murders, and they rolled out on 3 murders. They were all in the middle of the night, and I got called. It was very cool. I was a detective. They called me and said, we're assembling here. There's another case, and so it was a week of sleep deprivation. Everyone was really tired, and I got this was a journalism story. I did a magazine story on it. But at the so the lieutenant was this guy named Lieutenant Hurt. And at every crime scene, he would be the guy in charge, so he wouldn't really get too close. But at some point, he always went over to the victim and had this little moment of communion. And he wore glasses, and he would take them off, and he'd put the earpiece in his mouth, and he would, I don't know whether he would say a prayer or make a promise. He wouldn't tell me. He just said, that's not part of your story. That's private. And then to the end of the week, I was sitting in his office just saying, I got everything I need for a great story, and thank you, and stuff like that. And like I said, everyone was really tired, so he just started. He yawned, and then he took his glasses off and dropped them on his desk and rubbed his eyes because he was so tired. And I saw the earpiece on his glasses had a deep groove in it, and I realized his teeth were so clenched so tight when he had those moments of communion with the victim of a violent crime, of a murder. And I realized that kind of connection to the job, to the victim, to your life was something I didn't have in those first 2 books, and that if I did take the third chance, the third swing, I would certainly have that in the character that I wrote about. So that Detective Hurd, didn't know him that well. I covered him as a reporter for about a year. But there's a lot of him in Harry Bosch.
And
We'll
that's
take
from
one
the
more
heart,
question.
not just here.
One more question.
It's me up here. I have a question about the films. I wondered if when you handed over the material for Lincoln Lawyer, Blood Work, did you feel proprietary about the material? I know as a reader and a fan, I sort of did, because I think when it's in a novel, it's in its purest form. Was that difficult or exciting, or what was that like for you?
It's interesting. I'm coming to realize, and especially through what I'm seeing happening with Lee Child and Jack Reacher, that in many ways the readers hold these characters closer in some ways than the writer. To me, Harry Bosch is sacred, but he's sacred on the page. And so I look at film attempts and television attempts as just another way of telling the story, but not harming what was in the book. And I think a lot of readers don't have that same view. So therefore, when I've had these experiences, and you're only talking about the two that ended up getting made, but I sold several books, optioned several books. Harry Bosch is right now in a television development thing that hopefully he'll be a TV show next year. I'm always excited about it, and and of course it's a long shot, and you're certainly rolling the dice because when you give them your story, it's their turn to tell it, and they're going to tell it in a different way, obviously a visual way, and they're going to cast it and do all these things that can mess with the what you've done on the page. But to me, I don't know. Maybe because I love film and television, and it's certainly been inspirational to me. I always want to do it. I do learn. I mean, I guess it was 12 years ago they made Blood Work, and I had nothing to do with it, and I was disappointed by the choices they made. I mean, there's aspects about the experience that were great, but ultimately I was disappointed by some of the things they did. And so, you learn as you go, and so when I made the deal for Lincoln Lawyer, I did a lot of due diligence and a lot of almost like interviewing of who I gave it to. A fair number of people in Hollywood wanted Lincoln Lawyer, and I got my pick. And I didn't make any deal based on money or anything like this. I really made it on the sincerity of the person who wanted to make it, and I ended up believing him, and I was totally satisfied with what they did. And I haven't adopted that same thing with the Harry Bosch television project. I think if it goes, I think it will be pretty good. But, that's just my philosophy, but the bottom line is it's always rolling the dice.
We have a young man over here has one more question, Mike.
Hi, my name's Nick. I know I was looking through on Amazon, and I came across the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the Notre Dame football team, and could you just share a little bit of your belief of JFK?
I'm not really sure what you mean. He's the Notre Dame guy, but I know the book you're talking about, and I haven't read it yet. But I hear that that and the assassination of Lincoln are very entertaining books. You read those?
No, I did see Lincoln the other night, and it's fabulous. It's a great movie. I don't think Notre Dame is, as much as a lot of people in Ann Arbor would like to believe, that we're responsible for the death of JFK.
So, I don't know about that.
And so, thank you, National Writer Series, and Doug, and Ann, and Grant, and all the people here. I guess if Ernie Harwell, the late, great Ernie, if he was here now, if he was doing this interview, he would say, "Thank you, Michael. We got a pair of Florsheim Sibley shoes for you." Mike came, he gave it up. He gave it up tonight.